So we're here to solve this Nurikabe Loop puzzle by Murat Can Tonta. It removes the 2x2 constraint we're most familiar with from Nurikabes, but adds in a loop surrounding each of the islands, which brings its own constraints. Some of these will be familiar from loop puzzles. One example is that a loop, whenever it reaches the edge of a grid, has to use at least two cells to sort of get in and get out from the edge to sort of be a continuous cycle. And so even at the start, there are places like here and here where we know that the loop has to separate these two island groups, and if it has to come and touch this edge, it will take at least two cells, and taking two cells will take these cells in the middle. The more critical area to sort of see things to get stars in these areas. Here again, we need to be touching the edge of the grid to have the loop come in and out. They have to separate. There has to be a loop that separates these two groups. The loop will have to enter this cell. The loop will have to exit this cell, and will at least sort of take these cells to be able to do what it needs to, that these two cells in the edge are required. It can choose to take these two in the absolute corner, but it can also be the case that the island takes those cells. And the same logic that's true in the upper right is true in the lower left. And so in starting this puzzle, it's useful to mark these, and with them we can start to mark the islands out. And having marked the islands out, we see that even this early deduction we've made about the loop down here is stronger. We know exactly that it's using these cells. We can extend this island a bit. That extends the loop out further, like so. This island has to take even one more cell. Now we have a loop section that's going to extend up and out. Again, we're trying to keep these ends from closing so that we have a loop that covers the whole grid. We now have a path the loop has to take between these islands, and we can shape it like this. And we can do a little more in this corner. Well, let's at least catch up and do some of the same logic in this upper right. Again, the island in this corner will reach out. That will force some of the loop cells, like so, to extend. This loop has to continue down and out, continue down and out. Get this island completed, it will have to use these cells. This island is going to not come closer to the 13, so we have the loop extending as before. In this case, even adding in these two extra cells, we're only at 9 maximum cells for the island so far, so this island has to continue coming out, which means that this loop has to continue to reach around. We get to a point where now the 7 is getting close to this 3, and you'll need to have the loop separating these islands together. So again, a combination of typical Nurikabe steps and typical loop steps gets us like this. The loop has to continue to extend and not close itself off, so we can do this. This 11 wants to keep coming down. It's now reaching a point where it's actually isolated itself pretty effectively, and we see that the maximum count is going to have to take these, and we can fully finish off that corner of the grid. The loop comes down. This is a loop cell, so it has to sort of get in and out from this corner. This is a loop cell, it has to get in and out from this corner. We don't know much right now at the moment about this 5, but we can kind of estimate that the loop is going to come and take one end and come through and close here. There's actually a subtlety which we can start to see now. Again, the loop ends close here, and then there are 5 sort of ends up here that come together. This end has to avoid this end. If these ends came together, we would actually have 2 loops. We'd have this loop in the upper left, and we'd have everything else still forming. So there's actually a way where, however this comes, this loop cell is going to have to take this place, and these are going to have to stay separated. That this loop end is going to want to come over like this, and this loop end like this. And that will actually limit how the 5 can go. The 5 can only take at most one more cell to the left, at least looking right now. It's going to have to come down, so this loop is going to have to come down. This still has to take more cells, so we can start to even sketch this just logically. We'll actually finish this upper left corner before we get here, but this is where, just thinking about loops and thinking about topology, having one loop for the whole puzzle, this is a choke point where 2 ends are coming together, but they can't really interact. These ends still need to stay apart as we continue solving. So to finish up this upper left corner, what may be helpful is to really think about again, alternate between path and alternate between island. We've now taken 6 cells. This has to still continue as a loop, not touching itself. We sort of have finished this island now, so we'll shade around it. This island has to move out, but it can't isolate. the whole loop path, which is still coming around, so it comes like this. So we get this shape. We don't know if this cell comes left and down or right and down, but it at least comes down. We have to think about how the rest of this island fits. And so this is currently taking 4 cells. Let's say it's not taking this cell. If it doesn't take this cell, it also doesn't take these cells. So it's going to come like so, and that's going to pin this loop out in this way. So if we sort of draw that this loop continues up, at least to this cell, this is 4, 5, 6, 7. We see we have to take this. If this loop doesn't take this cell, it will force closing off of the whole thing as we sort of draw in the rest of the loop. So we can get some of these deductions by just actually lightly thinking about the connectivity of the grid. This is now the only 7 island left for that whole corner. Looks like this. We do have to give the 3 islands some space. There are different ways this can go, but again, let's just consider some of the scenarios. Let's say it doesn't use this cell, so it comes like this. Now the loop comes like this, but this cell is not reachable. So we do know it has to take at least 1 cell coming up. If it comes and overtakes like a cell like this, it's going to isolate this as a weird corner. So there's a place where we kind of have to consider if this cell or that cell are the ones used. We know that this cell is not part of the island. And here again, one way to do this is to recognize kind of a cornering issue. If it takes this cell, we're putting in a corner here and a corner here, and the loop can take one of those corners. It can't take both of those corners. And so this is a really bad situation in general. Sort of the island comes straight up. We end up seeing that the 5 does take 1 cell to the left, as we sort of sketched out earlier. Looks like this. We do have to now be a little careful as we get into this part of the grid, but we have to, as before, think about how the whole loop will work out. At the same time, these islands work out. One thing to potentially do there is to, again, think about what is the right kind of spacing for this 5 island. We are going to have the case where 2 loop ends are coming sort of like this, and 1 loop end is probably snaking around this way. There's an option where the 2 island it comes straight down, but then the rest of the loop has to come like this. And that's going to squeeze too little space for this 5 grid. Just thinking about where these 2 ends are right now, the furthest away this bottom end can go is into these middle cells, as I've sort of sketched out here, and that's if this comes directly across, this comes directly across. You can take these 4 cells, but you do end up needing to take 1 of these cells from the 5 island. And recognizing that 1 of these cells is taken by the 5 island, the loop has to do this to get around the 2. We'll actually then see that a necessary cell is that it takes this bottommost cell. If it took the top and not the bottom, if it was sort of this shape, that'd be no good. And so we can start by seeing that these 3 cells on the bottom edge are used by the loop. Not by the loop, sorry, by the 5 island. The next thing is to sort of see like how far up can these reach. Is there a case where we don't use this cell and the cell is part of the loop? In that case, we'd sort of have something like this or something like this. That's not going to work. So this is also a cell that's part of the island, and that starts to force some parts of the loop to come together as we had been drawing, particularly these. You'll now see the cornering really wants the loop to take this cell. It's required. Gives this shape to the grid. And you may say, like, these feel like more intuitive than logical steps. This is, again, we're just trying to fit 2 loop ends, and you'll see sort of how I was using these kind of curvy lines, but they do really make real and tangible logical walls between the cells you can take, that this 5 can't go further than 1 row from the bottom in practice, and that forces this efficient shape to the grid. We're now in a place where we're very limited by the total size left, and there's not too much. There's sort of 2 options for this too. I guess it's useful to see that this corner cell can't be part of the 13 and allow the right kind of shape for the 2. Like if the 2 comes up here, this is a problem. So that the 2 goes to the right is required. This island can't touch this edge. Any of these cells that are touched would actually isolate 1 of these loop ends. This is a typical Nurikabe rule, but when you have an isolated part of the grid, you have to avoid the edges with the islands coming in there. We're now left where we have 15 cells shaded. We know that this cell is shaded, and this has to itself, it has 1 loop end to the right. It has to get back to the rest of the grid, and it will take 2 more cells. So the two remaining cells to take come from this end, and everything else is part of the island. And this is even two away from these cells, sort of like these are all island cells. That will help us see the shape. And that this now needs to connect back to other shaded cells. The only sort of too long path that's useful here is this one. And marking that in, we end up finishing the puzzle. You can count that this group does have 13 left. All the rest are fulfilled. So this is a pretty tricky variation. I really loved seeing it from Murat. It has this primes theme we didn't really talk about, but I think these very large islands, particularly the 13 and these central fives, are the more interesting parts of the solve. Obviously, we have the symmetric beginnings, which is how the clue locations works those things. But this brings together some of the classic constraints of loop puzzles with some of the Nurikabe island thinking, and hopefully it was an enjoyable solve for you, and hope you learned something from this video, and we'll see you again soon.